Hey guys, Tyler 2K here. Today we're going to take a look at the long form version of the Steve Fox trailer. As usual, this is everything that I couldn't show and talk about in the short form version of the trailer. Of course, everything shown can and might change by final release date. Also, I'm not going to ever really say I'm 100% accurate or know what's going on. And once again, even if I am accurate, because it might change, it might look like I'm inaccurate. So just keep in mind, this is all speculation, granted, educated speculation. In that, first things first, with the general look of Steve, there is for sure something funky going on. It kind of reminds me of Ryu for Street Fighter V, I think it was, where they showed off Ryu and he was like all bloated, and it ended up being like there was something weird with like the in-game camera. Or sorry, they filmed it in 4:3, but then they released it in 16:9, so he was all stretched out. I don't know for a fact with Steve. Clearly, sometimes Steve looks fine, other times he doesn't. So I'm still going to give Namco the benefit of the doubt. They'll probably fix it before release date. Or if they don't do it by release date, they'll do it shortly after from the backlash regarding it. But neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and talk Steve. Okay, so yeah, we see the new move here. I don't know, of course, exactly what this is. Now, someone had pinged me. Now, apologies, I can't remember your name right now. Today's technically a work day. I'm doing this in between working from home. But someone had mentioned that there is the possibility that this is a back-forward input. And actually, I don't hate that theory because they said it's a back-forward 2, which it could definitely be. And the reason I don't believe it's back-forward 2 is we'll talk about it later. But if you notice with Steve, and we're doing this frame by frame, this is the first frame of animation. Although, if we look at the neutral stance, this is a move before the move comes out. So, in case you don't know, in prior Tekken games, you could do something called jump canceling. And I'll go ahead and give a shout out top right corner how to perform jump canceling, which is a really important technique how to do it, because not only can you make attacks visually harder to react to, but you can do some trickery stuff by making attacks essentially silent by skipping the noise. So usually, if this is an old game, I'd say like, oh yeah, for a fact here, the Steve player is holding up forward for 1 frame before sliding to 2. But because jump canceling is gone in T8, that probably is not the case. Now granted, I haven't studied jump canceling too much in Tekken 8, but I can tell you that for the most part, it's gone. And if it's not gone, it's gone for humans. Maybe some Taz sort of videos in the future about that. To have weird sort of buffering going on with the new T8 system, but for like humans, it's gone. So yeah, the fact that Steve flinches here, because as I talked about before, usually you look at their hands and you look at their head to signify when a first frame animation is occurring. Very clearly, this is frame 1, 0, 1. So because he's moving prior to this, there is definitely some sort of directional in it. With that being said, it likely isn't a back forward 2, because in case you don't know how back forward and forward back work, technically it's not forward back. Like for instance, jet upper is not forward back 2, it's forward neutral back 2. And what happens is if you skip the 1 frame of neutral in the input, it will give you the wrong input. Specifically with Brian, it'll give you a back 2, and I think back 2 is like 15. So if you try to 14 someone with a jet upper and you hit back 2 instead, yeah, you'll miss because they'll be able to block it or they'll duck it. It doesn't matter. So yeah, the fact that Steve does flinch here gives some credence to it possibly not being up back 2. Second thing of note is, yeah, this could very much be up forward 2. For all I know, maybe they got rid of the dunk, or maybe now his dunk is up forward 1+2. I don't want to really discredit the fact that it's very much possible. Now, the reason why it can't be anything other than up back 2, or up 2 or up forward 2, very similar to Devilgen, like I talked about, whose input you can perform it out of all of those inputs in Tekken. Just the fact that we've seen down forward 2, we've seen forward 2, and we have not seen up forward 2. So again, there is the possibility that this is up forward 2, or up 2, or up back 2, like I said, with Devilgen specifically. So this is +4 on block. Now granted, usually how Namco gives you hints is they'll have an attack, and your attack will be basically the same attack as your opponent, or some sort of close analog. So down forward 2 with Steve beating an I-14, down forward 1 would naturally infer that it's +1. But if you go frame by frame, and I'm not going to count it for you here, take my word for it. If you go frame by frame, it's actually +4. So it's weird that they picked down forward 2 in this position. In context, they should have picked back 1, which would have been very clearly I-12 versus +4. So you're beating down forward 2 is winning by 1 frame, essentially. So that would be how normally Namco would do it. So it's weird that they chose down forward 1 or king. Okay, big nerf. Down forward 2 no longer causes a double overstun or a natural hit launcher. Notice how king does fall to the ground. His hand hits the ground. Almost similar to like an ass stun. But in this case, Masaji is guaranteed the duck 1+2. One thing of note is that presumably this is a clean +16. And now that we've seen that like back 2 is no longer a natural hit launcher later in the video, that would mean that Steve doesn't have anything at 16. So Masaji on I-16 would be the best thing he could do. So as usual, presumably down forward 2 doesn't naturally transition into duck. So theoretically, you could do down forward 2, take the +16, and then hit king with like a down forward 1+2 for heat engage or 15, sorry, forward 1+2 option. So on and so forth. You cascade down the line, or maybe you want to back 1 2 into the Southpaw Stance, for instance, I would see later. The world is yours. The benefit of duck canceling down forward 2, for people who don't know, down forward 2 is actually unsafe on block. So presumably if you don't transition into duck after down forward 2, even though you're getting a clean +16 standing, that would mean you leave yourself open to punishment. So that's the major difference here. So Masaji would be essentially confirmable, and it's not super punishable in the sense that you can essentially confirm it anyway. So even if you don't confirm it down the line, I don't think there's a major string penalty on it, if I remember correctly. So you're not really putting yourself at too much risk by going for the normal duck cancel. Okay, Masaji with a massive push away. It's important to note that it still is like sending him almost like half screen, which is crazy if you think about it. So if like the wall is here, or even like right here under his feet, you're going to get a clean wall splat into the forward 2-1 series, or sorry, forward 2-2 specifically that we see later on in the video. Okay, so presumably this is just a new animation, the back 3+4. I was thinking initially when I was making the video that maybe this would be a typical drop back, but if you look at the Southpaw Stance, the Southpaw Stance leaves his left hand essentially forward. Here we see right hand up, left hand down, which infers flickers. So, okay, so we do see the drop back into, I don't believe this to be like a flicker 2. I think this is a specific flicker that can only be performed off backdash. I did the analogy towards Lydia with her backdash, her cat drop 1 being an unblockable. Of course, here an unblockable would be significantly better than a high guard crush, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And talking earlier what we had mentioned with like down forward 2 counter hit, it's important to note that as usual have to take Namco at their face value. So despite the fact that guard crush here guarantees 1-1-2, for all we know, this could be +11, it could be +12, or maybe even +13, and whoever did this Punisher just didn't know how to play Steve. So, okay, maybe you get a back 1-2. So it doesn't appear to be the case, but keep in mind, it is possible. It's not something that it should be necessarily taken always for face value. We can only kind of draw conclusions on what they show us, but there have been times where the person operating the character, or either character, doesn't really know what they're doing, and they kind of let things slip through that don't really work. So just keep in mind this is probably +11 because there's no similar frame for like 11 for Steve. So this could be very much +11. That way it's more consistent to get the 1-1-2. But or maybe it is +12 and this person just didn't do 2. I doubt it, but it is possible. Okay, so we see duck entrance. He does double duck, so it's called an Ext duck, an extended duck. Now, thing of note here is this guard crush animation. It should be noted that there is 2 different terminologies at use here. So a guard crush is an attack which causes the screen to break and guarantees some sort of follow-up attack. Guard breaks have always been in Tekken as well, and a guard break is usually something similar, but it's not guaranteed. But you'll notice the person on defense will throw their arms back, And usually the person who is the initiator of the guard break is at plus frames. But there are examples where it is negative. So there are attacks that are properly negative. The terminology before, false advantage. So even though you get a guard break animation, it might not be guaranteed, or you might not be plus as the aggressor. Yeah, it's keep in mind, guard break, guard crush are two very different things. So here we see the guard crush guaranteeing the 1-1-2. And then the very next move, and like I talked about, Namco is pretty clever with how they build these videos. And I don't want to call anyone out, but I don't like the idea that people just call these like combo videos when they're just chock full of clues of how things work. Now for the beginners, oh yeah, this is like, oh cool, Steve is doing combo, you know. But for like, you get over the hump, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense here, and this is what they're doing here, and this makes sense here. So the more you know about your character, or know how to play against said character, the more like knowledge seeps through. So while it's not explicit, it's heavily, heavily implied. So once again, we just saw a guard crush. Now Steve goes for Ext duck forward 2, which normally would be a guard crush, but we don't see the guard crush animation here. Instead, we see a guard break animation. So King is recoiling against incoming attack, and then gets clipped by the incoming duck 1. Now, again, that's not to say that this doesn't still guard crush, but the fact that it now has an explicit, King turns red because it's dealing chip damage, and there's no guard crush animation, like no big sprite on the screen, I'm inclined to believe that nothing is properly guaranteed here. Although, of course, it should be noted, if we see how late King is starting the sidestep here, this duck 2 on like 16 or 17 is basically hitting on like the 5th or 6th frame. So there might be a proper window to get it, but once again, I believe it's maybe just a clean plus 12, plus 11 or plus 12 G, in which case, G meaning King can guard. Okay, and then we see the knockdown. Also, I'll give the shout out here. I'm not really a Steve player, so I didn't really understand, like, okay, well, maybe duck 1 hitting to the left is new, but I have heard that to be the case. Again, shout outs to Discord there. But yeah, it still causes natural hit knockdown, and duck 1 is presumably safe on block. And from what we see later with back 1 being a natural hit, being a counter hit launcher still, maybe duck 1 is still a counter hit launcher too. Okay, so we see duck 2, aka skyscraper, big launch into a right side sway 1-2. Keep in mind the right weave 1-2 was previously a mid option, and now it performs essentially a shoulder charge rather into the up back 2 that we had seen previously. I would presume from the animation that it's identical to what we had seen earlier. This is probably just an up back 2 out of stance instead. Of course, now it being a mid-high allows for better counterplay against it, especially because, in case you don't know, right weave 1 shoulder can already enter into stances. So he can technically right weave 1 and enter into flicker, or even, I think maybe even pab in T7. So yeah, he's always had a mix-up to right weave 1, and it's very safe on block. It's like -1 or something. Really absurd, especially considering the speed of flicker in general. So yeah, it's good that now this at least allows for proper counterplay, and at the same time for the Steve player, possibly gives you access to a, I don't know if scarier is the right word, but a more utility ground-based attack, e.g. a homing high, +4, so on and so forth. Okay, so here's our first inclination that up back 2 has something special. We see that Steve drops into a new stance, so his stance is with his right arm down, left hand elevated. Also, he is now with his right foot forward and left foot backwards, aka a Southpaw Stance. So there's 2 stances in general boxing, essentially orthodox, where your left foot's forward, and then Southpaw, where your right foot is forward. So this new stance would be in addition to his other stances, which he has quite a lot of. He has flicker, he has pab, he has albatross, he technically has the left weave, right weave, as well as back sway. And then, of course, he has duck. So he already has 6 stances. So this would, or 6 or 7, I've lost count. And now this will be his 7th or 8th stance. And the good news, bad news from Southpaw is that so far we've only seen like 3 options. In this case, Steve goes for a Southpaw 2, essentially a very fast skyscraper style attack. What I think that's interesting about Southpaw 2 is that if you look at the animation when he initiates Southpaw 2, he's kind of doing like a half rocket launcher, but notice the duck. So he's basically doing a QCF2 low off of this attack, and then he comes up with the launcher to the big option. So that makes me wonder if Southpaw 2 will be a steel pedal attack. Like, notice how low the swipe is getting towards the ground. Now, granted, Duck 2, once again, aka Skyscraper, is not a steel pedal, but Ext Duck 2 is a steel pedal. Not only is it Ext Duck 2 a steel pedal, it's also a Class 1 launcher, so they get hit very high into the ground. So I don't think this is an accident that this looks very similar to the QCF2, because, yeah, I believe this is probably a steel pedal. Now, the big thing of note here is that this steel pedal, Southpaw 2, will be a mid, and then we later on see that Southpaw 1 is also a mid. So from what we've seen thus far, there doesn't appear to be a low off of the stance. So maybe the low is the throw that we'll see towards the end of the video. Yeah, Steve ends the combo with a very simple Sonic Fang. Of course, we see the Heat Engager Spark, or Heat Engager Slash, whatever you want to call it, which will be much more important later on. Okay, minus 13 on Hop Kick. We see Steve punished with a back 1-2. Previously, a back 1-2 was a spin option, but notice how now, a couple of things. There is no standing spin because King doesn't get splatted into the wall. The second thing of note is the second hit of back 1-2 is also a homing attack. So presumably this is still a double high. That means back 1-2 has a little bit less utility as a punisher and a combo extender. Although the fact that there is a homing attack on this second hit does mean that this is a spin option. So again, I'll say this until the cows come home. There is a difference between a tornado spin and a standing spin. So a tornado spin is what you've seen earlier with the Southpaw 2. It allows you to extend the combo, and typically, unlike a normal spin, leaves the opponent like right next to you. So here we see an example of a stand spin. Notice how King is flipping through the air, allowing Steve to transition into stance, allowing Steve to then pop a tornado spin. To the best of my knowledge from what I've seen, most, if not all, homing attacks that are at least high do cause a standing spin in the sense of mid-combo spin. I need to workshop the name, of course, but it makes sense in context. So keep in mind, that is a standing spin or a combo spin, and then we have the T8 mechanic of a tornado spin. So at the wall, a standing spin won't cause a spin state, but a tornado spin would. So it's important to notice that back 1-2 would have some utility mid-combo because of that reason. One final thing of note but with back 1-2 is that, I mean, you can make the case that this is very similar to up back 2, but I don't believe to be necessarily an analog, although it's yet to be seen. Maybe because back 1-2 here, similar to up back 2, transitions into Southpaw, maybe there is some bleed over in the move. I doubt it. You never know, though. We won't know until release date. Okay, so from Southpaw, he transitions into Duck. He cancels stance, goes for a Duck 1. King, of course, ducks, trying to duck about incoming. Maybe he's reading Duck 4-2 or something. Gets clipped, knocked down, and now we see a brand new string. 4-2-2, 1-2, and notice that there was like a quick succession of attacks. So if you watch this in full speed, you might not notice the fifth hit, or specifically the fourth hit. It's very fast. It does a ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, and to the final hit. One thing of note also here with this new series, this kind of looks similar to 4-2-1 Duck Cancel Wildman, which is like usually what you want to do in like a Tekken 6 or a Tekken Tag 2, once you get the opponent to the wall or into a ground break situation. So now the fact that he has a 4-2-2 series into a Wildman that doesn't require any technical seal, the end with the Wildman Ender, will maybe mean this will be very strong in a ground break situation. One thing of note, of course, is we do see the low slump rollover mechanic. And in case you don't know, again, this is a brand new mechanic added to 8, or at least it signifies that you're stuck in low slump. So basically this hit no longer is essentially an unskilled hit, but doesn't cause any sort of special property. So technically, the forward 2-2 1-2-1 won't ground break if it's used in the end of a combo like this, but in an open field, it might technically work because you're not stuck in low slump and hence get that rollover. Again, this rollover is really just a signifier to beginners. Oh, hey, I get a Sparky. That's a lot of damage. Oh, I get a rollover. That's probably the best combo I can do. These are all like just little natural tricks for beginners for them to better understand how the game works. And it works. It does work that way. It's nice. Okay, we see some mistranslations with Arong talking about punches instead of the word hit. That is a mistranslation. Yeah, so here we see the worst change, or lack of worst change ever, and that's specifically back one still being a single hit counter hit launcher in T8. At this point, you guys probably know, but for like everyone in the cast, Magic 4 is gone. So if your character had a Magic 4, you would typically have to commit to a high string in order to combo off the Magic 4. Great example is what we talked about in the short form video with Steve. Steve already has back 1-2, which is a launcher if you get clipped. So they already had a natural move for back 1 or replacement with back 1-2. So let's say you read the back 1, you block the back 1, and then you just duck the second hit. But now the fact that he can transition still into duck and still be a counter hit launcher without taking like that big inherent risk is really disappointing. Now granted, Steve did seem to lose quite a lot, so his signature back 1 on 13 I guess isn't necessarily game breaking when you consider context of how much weaker Steve might potentially be in T8. But I know even me, who doesn't have like a counter hit characters, this is like a betrayal. It's like, oh, they were very adamant with having Law 4-3 and stuff like that be duckable, but it's weird Steve still has his. Okay, we got Ext Duck 1, of course, big boy pickup. He pops the meter, which looks very similar to a backsway 1, of course, which means he basically still has backsway 1. These heat burst animations are all bleed over from the move list of the characters. So if you ever see a heat burst, it's because they have the move. So let's say, I don't know what Dragunov will have, but let's say Dragunov's heat burst is forward 4-2 or something. I don't know. That would mean Dragunov still has 4-4-2, despite we won't see 4-4-2 in a trailer realistically. Okay, we see a 2-2 being a tornado spin. This looks almost identical to Steve's Tekken Tag 4 2-2. So I think they kind of dug deep into the old moveless kit here to be like, oh, let's bring back some Tekken 4 Steve or something where he was introduced. But being a tornado spin is pretty good. The one thing I didn't note, but I talked about it plenty online, is this makes me believe that 2-2 will actually be NC knockdown wall splat probably. So whereas he's lost his back 1-2 on 13, he now has a 2-2, which is not a launcher, of course, it's just a knockdown or wall splat. With that being said, because we see this tornado spin uppercut, again, these tornado spin uppercuts typically point to -15 or high. So that means 2-2 probably is launch punish bomb block, so on and so forth. Okay, we see manual PAB transition into PAB forward to 1, causing a long-range wall splat, in which case Steve could probably follow up with a dash-up forward 2-1 Massage ender, typical, which is really important because the very next combo we see, and remember how I talked how Namco is very coy with showing you a lot of information that you might not be readily, it's maybe not hit in the membrane correctly, but it's there. We see this later on where Alb 2, might as well talk about it right now, but Alb 2 will no longer be a proper splat. It causes a lower sliding trajectory, which means it will wall splat when it's very close, but in normal combo usage, Alb 2 will no longer splat, which is a significant nerf, but not a really unplaced one, considering how T8 has tried to simplify the game overall. Okay, we got a back 3 punish with a Steve back 2. Back 2 no longer causes a launcher, but instead is at least +14. So going to what I was talking about earlier, how, again, just the fact that we see it's at least +14 doesn't mean necessarily the frame data stops there. So by definition, it means it's not better than +15, But because back 2 might actually be plus 15, that might mean that Steve doesn't have to go for heat engager here, although heat would be very valuable, as we'll see in the very next clip. But maybe at plus 15, he goes for forward 1 plus 2, 2 instead, right? Maybe you don't want the heat. Maybe you just want the big boy damage right away. So again, don't know enough information. All we know is what we're given or told in this situation. Yeah, Sonic Fang, of course, I-14 is a heat engager. Steve then goes for the down forward 2 heat smash. And the fact that we haven't seen more heat smashes does, in this video lead me to believe that this is literally the only heat smash. It's interesting that it starts off down forward 2, and if you look at the frame data, it's hitting on 15. So this is the normal 15 option. So what does 15 mean? Well, you notice how I talked about how back 2 might be explicitly 15, because we don't know, simply because they show a Sonic thing doesn't mean it's only plus 14. That would mean for 15, for instance, back 2 into heat smash would be a natural hit combo, and because this is a standing launcher, that would mean your heat smash here would do a fuck ton of damage. So just kind of like similar to Jack, where his guard crush is like plus 10 at least. You can go for a heat smash, for instance, and do a fuck ton of damage from there. So again, just because it's not shown doesn't mean that's not necessarily the case. One final thing, we see this massive uppercut, the dunk, causing like way into the air. Like, it's a little bit silly, but I do wonder if that would cause a wall splat. Now, granted, from how far he's getting hit, it probably shouldn't. But this animation does, if I remember correctly, look similar to Brian's counter hit back 1. So it is an animation we've seen before. Damn, you know what? Yeah, he's not attacking. Yeah, and we know he's not attacking, but because there's no purple slash here. So that means that up back 2 with Steve acts very similar, and this is something I was theorizing anyway, acts very similar to Leroy back 3. Leroy back 3 is probably one of the best moves he's gotten in a while, and it acts very similar here. Leroy back 3 guarantees Hermit 1 plus 2, which is a fuck ton of damage, and a heat engager. So very similar here, up back 2 might just be NC plus 14. Now granted, because we had mentioned up back 2 does transition into Southpaw, which we see here, Southpaw 1 is the answer and the only thing that properly is guaranteed. Of course, this animation looks very similar to Rocket Launcher, aka QCF1, but notice how there is a homing sprite built into it. Like I talked about, the fact that Southpaw 1 and 2 are both mids is kind of interesting when it comes to balance decision making, but still is guaranteed here. And again, Southpaw 1 is I-14, and Southpaw 2, if I remember correctly, is 16. Okay, so this is the scary part, and this is probably why Ext Duck Forward 2 is no longer a guard crush. So when you are in heat mode, you can gain access to Ext Duck after a single duck. So notice how, even though the fact that Steve did a single forward 3, he's able to get Ext Duck Forward 2 out on the first try. So that means this is absolutely fucking terrifying options to have access to. So Steve probably will be a character where you want to maintain your heat as long as possible, and then apply pressure with Ext Duck for free, especially because like Ext Duck 2, as I talked about, is a massive, massive launcher, and it will be a not quite a Dragon Punch, but it'll be very evasive against a bunch of attacks. And then on top of that, like I also talked about, Ext Duck 1 in plus frames, it's a counter launcher, it's shit, maybe you can still massage into Shiro combo, I don't know. So yeah, Steve is going to be absolutely fucking terrifying. And seeing as how he has been so nerfed, this will be his way to be like, hey, I'm still a character and I'm still here. So, hey, we got the Ext Duck Forward 2, plus frames again. Guard break, not a guard crush. And now we see an Ext Duck throw. And then furthermore, you know, again, like I said, because this is now coming out of duck, there are no sparks, but I would presume that this duck throw isn't accessible outside of EX. We are in heat mode. Although, you know what? Maybe we're not. Okay, damn. Fuck you, dude. Watching this in slow motion blows my mind, because now I'm picking up on more stuff. So, like I talked about, So notice how when he enters into duck, he sparks up. But here, when he goes for the throw, he doesn't spark when he enters into duck. That would infer that there is a special input for heat mode Ext duck. So instead of duck, Ext duck being forward 3 charge or something like that, I can't remember. I just kind of do it by muscle memory. That would mean he now has an explicit input. With that being said, what would the input be? Maybe it's just forward 3 forward, because it can't be forward 3 plus 4, right? Which is the manual PAB entrance. Whoa, that's interesting. So that means then the throw is a proper throw, period. So yeah, there's the heat burst, or not heat burst, the heat usage for Ext duck forward 2. And now he does duck, but doesn't pop the meter. Well, it doesn't matter because he goes for a 1+2 throw, although it looks to be starting with the 2. His left hand is also pretty extended, so I can't really know for a fact. At first, I was like, oh, this looks like a 2 throw, but with the left hand extended as well, I'm not super sold. Also, we need to watch this in full speed to kind of give context. But if you look at the duck throw, he cinches and then he attacks, which, to be honest, is very similar to his Tekken 4 cinch option. So that leads me to believe that this duck throw is a cinch tool and also has a 50-50 built off of it. Now, the interesting part here is what we see at his feet. This is a heat version of his cinch throw. So I don't know if that means maybe in heat it just does a little bit more bonus damage, or maybe in heat mode this throw cannot be escaped. Again, there is like so little information we've gotten for this new mechanic specifically that it's going to be a wait and see. We're going to have to wait until release date to actually get a good read on what the hell's going on. But again, notice the cinch, notice the delay, notice the heat engage or the heat mode version of it. Yeah, maybe the final hit, this big, like almost like Alb 2 push away, is just specific, or not even Alb 2, okay? Oh, okay, kind of. More like his unblockable, right? That looks like his QCB forward 2. Maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of like information we don't have there. Most important thing to note is that it's not a heat smash, because notice how Steve still has heat mode activated. So that might have cost a meter, but he still has meter to spare. Okay, we see the big dunk over the down back 3. Of course, because this is heat dash cancel, that means the instant running 2 with Steve is a heat engager. Goes for the new forward 2-2, entering into Southpaw. And now from Southpaw, he goes for tornado spin, heat Southpaw 2, of course. Then we see the very classic back 1, flicker 1, Alb 2, and as I talked about, notice the downward trajectory on the final hit. That again means that there is no wall spot present. That means it's very similar to a Season 4 Leroy up forward 3+4, 1+2, where they just get spiked essentially to the ground. So while there is some carry to it, the splat type will be very poor and or not existent, which means you don't want to end with the back 1 flicker 1 Alb 2 line. That means you'll probably want to end with the manual PAB forward 2-1 instead. The good news, of course, is the Alb forward 2-1 is going to do a shit ton of damage. So in the grand scheme of things, it's probably better to end it with that period. But still, you're not going to get that super long, consistent carry anymore with Steve, which is a good thing. Okay, and last but not least, we see the full crouch down forward 2 interrupting the incoming forward 4-3. Like I talked about in the short form video, usually when it comes to Rage Art, they will show a counter it tool. So there's no shot that full crouch down forward 2 is a counter it launcher. They're just doing this to be really dramatic. Or maybe they just like seeing Haran getting punched in the nuts. Okay, not that nuts. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But then, of course, pops the Rage Art. The Rage Art, it's not horrible. The weird part about this Rage Art is what you see right here. The very beginning of the animation, he puts him into some like really weird spin state. Like what the? It's almost like a classic Tekken 7 spin. And then hit him with the spike into the ground. And of course we see the Hajime no Ippo, the Dempsey roll ender, bunch of flurries to the chest, and then whack, whack, whack. Which of course looks similar to his swaying. I can't remember the exact term. The Cobra roll, I believe it's called. ending with the massive uppercut to the gut. And then, interestingly enough, this is something I noticed. Notice the shockwave. This is something similar to what we had seen with Victor. Victor has a shockwave too, and his shockwave isn't off of Rage Art, if I remember correctly. But it's like, oh, that's weird. We got that shockwave mechanic again, which might be signifying something coming down the pipe. I'm not going to say what it is, but it's very peculiar that they had chosen that animation. So, yeah, that'll be it. The Steve trailer, overall, I mean, I do like the trailer. The looks on Steve, not the best, but it's okay, all things considered. There is time to fix it. His proportions, kind of similar to like Fang, are a little bit weird, but again, this is something that might be just properly bugged that will be fixed in the future. So, comments, questions, concerns, hit me up, YouTube, Reddit, Twitch, Twitter, and I'll see you guys next time.